My parents insisted I drop out of college and take a gap year because their precious daughter is finally starting college after failing high school twice, so they say they can't afford both our educations. I turned to my grandparents for help, and they revealed the college fund they had saved for both of us, but now my parents swear they only ever knew about my sister's fund. Can you imagine finding out your entire future had been stolen from right under your nose by the very people who were supposed to protect it? Because that's exactly what my parents did to me, and the payback? Oh, it was epic. My younger sister, Vivi, she's always been, well, a handful. Academically, school was just never her thing. I mean, the girl failed high school twice. This last time, her third attempt, was supposed to be her redemption arc. It wasn't just bad grades either. She struggled to focus, to find any motivation. For a while, she'd used dyslexia as an excuse, but after multiple tests, that was completely ruled out. Once that crutch was gone, Vivi started acting out. Seriously acting out. Countless times, she was caught smoking weed with older students, ditching class to go to parties. My parents were constantly getting those dreaded phone calls from the school. My folks, bless their hearts, they were at their wits' end. They tried talking, they tried grounding her, but Vivi was a master escape artist. She'd sneak out in the dead of night to meet friends, or even random guys she'd met online. And you know what the craziest part was? Instead of holding Vivi accountable, they'd turn their frustration on me. They'd blame me for not being a good enough older sister, for not guiding her, for not somehow transforming her into a better person. It wasn't like I didn't care. I did. I wanted to be a good sister, but Vivi just never listened. Every time I tried to talk sense into her, she'd get defensive, angry even. After a while, I just stopped. The constant fighting, the feeling that her behavior was my responsibility when nothing I did seemed to help, it just wore me down. It was easier to keep the peace, even though deep down, I knew it wasn't helping Vivi make better choices. Then one morning, our house erupted into chaos. My mom, in her usual routine, went to check on us. But when she opened Vivi's door, the room was empty. I was jolted awake by her screaming, her yelling at my dad and me, demanding to know where Vivi was. Half asleep and confused, I rushed to her room, desperately hoping for a note, a sign, anything. Nothing. We tried calling her, but her phone was off. The panic, the sheer terror, it just escalated. We were literally seconds away from calling the police. No trace, no idea if she was safe. My parents were beside themselves. Just as we were about to make that call, a mutual friend of ours messaged me privately. What she confessed next sent a wave of dread washing over me. Vivi had gone out again, to meet some random guy she'd met online for a date. My heart sank. I told my parents, and thankfully, this friend knew the guy's address. Vivi, in her carelessness, had shared it. We jumped in the car and sped over there. My mom, a force of nature when she's scared, didn't hesitate. She barged into the place, screaming Vivi's name. The look on Vivi's face when she saw us, a mix of pure shock and mortified embarrassment. She couldn't believe we'd found her. Thank goodness, nothing dangerous had happened. The guy seemed just as surprised as we were. Turns out, Vivi had lied about her age, pretended to be older. My dad, absolutely furious, laid into the guy before practically dragging Vivi out. That car ride home. Oh, it was a shouting match. Vivi, defiant as ever, argued with them at every turn, while my mom tried to make her understand the gravity of her actions. It was one of the most exhausting car rides of my life. Vivi was also furious at me for getting the address from our friend. I could have just snuck back home, she hissed. All you had to do was keep your mouth shut. She clearly had no idea how serious her actions were, how worried we'd all been. When we finally got home, my mom grounded Vivi, and I thought, this is it. Maybe this will be the turning point. But that's not what happened. Instead, after that terrifying close call, my parents became almost overly protective. They were so terrified of losing her that they started giving in to her every demand just to keep her safe and sound at home. Vivi, sharp as she was, realized just how much leverage she had. She knew that as long as they were afraid of her running off or getting into trouble, they would give her whatever she wanted. And she exploited that. When Vivi failed high school the first time, I expected consequences. A serious talk, some discipline. But no, my parents didn't even scold her. Instead, they told her they understood how difficult high school could be and encouraged her to try again, as if failing was no big deal. They truly believed they were supporting her by being understanding and patient, but to me, it felt like they were turning a blind eye to reality. Their leniency only reinforced her belief that she didn't have to take responsibility. Every time she messed up, they'd excuse it. It was like they were rewarding her bad behavior instead of teaching her accountability. Then, when she repeated high school for the second time, things somehow got even worse. Vivi was caught cheating on an exam and got suspended. This was a serious offense. Surely, this would be the moment my parents finally stepped in, right? Nope. They sympathized with her, saying the pressure of school was too much. It was then that Vivi hit a low point. She decided to drop out of high school entirely. She felt frustrated, defeated, watching her friends move on while she was still stuck. So, she started working at a bar just to make some money. My parents tried to convince her to go back, even urged me to talk to her. I spent a lot of time encouraging her. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew she couldn't live her whole life working at a bar. My parents had spoiled her enough. I knew I had to push her to be better. After a lot of back and forth, Vivi finally agreed to try one last time. My parents paid for her to enroll in another high school, despite her record. This time, I kept a close eye on her. And honestly, she really did work hard. She passed her exams, unlike all the previous times. I was incredibly proud, and to celebrate, I took her out. Later, when I dropped her off at my parents' place, I was so exhausted I just crashed in my old room. Driving back to my college apartment felt impossible. The next morning, I woke up to the most delicious, familiar smell: cinnamon. My mom's cinnamon rolls are legendary. I knew she must have made them. Excited, I hurried down to the kitchen. As I got closer, I heard my parents talking in low voices. When I walked in, they both looked up, their faces tight. Sensing the awkwardness, I asked what was going on, but they quickly brushed it off. My mom, trying to act casual, said everything was fine. Then she changed the subject, insisting I stay for dinner. I'd planned to head back to college, but she pleaded, "One more day won't hurt." I agreed, not thinking anything of it. That very evening, at dinner, my dad started talking about how proud they were of both of us. My mom nodded along. Then they turned to Vivi. "Have you started thinking about college yet?" they asked. Vivi immediately lit up. She excitedly talked about her plans, how she'd applied to several Ivy League schools, wanting to go to a prestigious college like mine. She was so hopeful, so optimistic. It was genuinely heartwarming to see her excited about her future after everything. My parents listened attentively, but then they turned to me. There was a silence, a shift in their gaze. It felt different, like there was something serious they needed to say. As soon as my dad spoke, I could hear the nervousness in his voice. He started by saying that since Vivi would soon be off to college, he and Mom had made a very difficult decision. He said they could no longer afford to pay for my college fees moving forward. I just sat there, stunned, not fully understanding. My mom chimed in, trying to soften the blow. She explained how they'd always wanted to remodel the house, but couldn't because they were so busy supporting me financially. Now, with Vivi about to start college, they'd be dipping into their savings even further, risking their retirement. "It's only fair," she said, "for you to start paying for your education. You're an adult now. We can't fund both of you." My mind was racing. How was I supposed to afford my own college fees? I barely had enough savings for a couple of months, even with my part-time job. The thought of taking out loans for the rest of my degree made my stomach drop. I had just 2 years left until graduation, and now I was being told I was on my own? I glanced at Vivi. She looked just as shocked and concerned as I did. It didn't feel fair. She had just graduated after failing so many times. And while I was happy for her, the idea that I would now have to fend for myself while my parents continued to support her financially felt like a punch to the gut. I asked them, "So, you're only planning to cover 2 years of Vivi's college education too, like you did with me? And she'll have to pay her own way after that?" They avoided eye contact. The silence that followed was enough. My mother started. "Vivi's the youngest. She needs more attention. That's why we'll be paying for her entire college education. Otherwise, she might drop out altogether." To them, it made perfect sense. Vivi needed their help. I was old enough to take care of myself. But to me, it felt like they were abandoning me halfway through something they had promised. I tried to argue, to make them see how unfair this was. I wasn't asking them to completely fund my life. I just wanted them to follow through on the commitment they had made to me, just like they were doing for Vivi. But they cut me off. My dad's tone grew frustrated. He told me if I couldn't afford the fees, I could just quit college, take a year off. It's not a big deal, he said. You can work double shifts, save up, and finish your degree later. The idea of delaying my graduation, of taking a year off, felt like a nightmare. And while I understood that finances could be tight, it hurt to see how easily they were willing to make that sacrifice for Vivi, but not for me. Since that awful dinner, I was at a complete loss. Vivi was just as upset with our parents, but I urged her not to argue with them. I told her if she pushed too hard, they might cut off her college funding too, leaving her in the exact same position I was in. The last thing I wanted was for both of us to be stuck. A few days later, surprisingly, it was Vivi who gave me an idea. Why don't you talk to our maternal grandparents? She suggested. They're pretty well off. Growing up, both of us had spent a lot of time with them. They lived in a different town, and though it had been a while, I decided to take the bus to see them in person. It felt like my last hope. When I arrived, my grandparents were thrilled to see me. Their warm welcome made me feel a little more at ease, though the knot in my stomach never fully disappeared. They had no idea why I was really there, and I felt guilty for not being able to just enjoy the visit without bringing up my financial troubles. After settling in, I finally mustered the courage to open up. I told them everything about the conversation with my parents, how they decided to stop paying for my college, and how I now had no way to cover the costs. I tried to keep it together, but it was hard not to get emotional. I saw the concern on their faces as I spoke, but they listened patiently. Then, with my heart racing, I asked if they could loan me some money. I made sure to emphasize it would be a loan, promising I'd pay it all back. I was serious. I didn't want them to feel like it was a handout. Still, asking for help felt like I was crossing a line, and the guilt lingered. However, my grandparents seemed completely taken aback by my request. They exchanged confused glances. Then my grandfather asked, "Why would you need more money when you already have a college fund?" I stared back, just as confused. "What college fund?" That's when my grandfather explained something that completely floored me. He told me that he and my grandmother had set up 2 separate college funds years ago, one for me, one for Vivi. After I turned 18, they'd given both funds to my parents, trusting them to manage it and use it solely for our education. This, apparently, was how my parents had been paying for my college fees until now. My grandparents were under the impression that Vivi and I were taken care of. "You just need to ask your parents for the money that was set aside for you," he said. I was speechless. I looked at them incredulously, trying to process it all. My parents had never once mentioned a college fund. Not to me, not to Vivi. For years, we thought they were paying out of their own savings. My mind raced. Why hadn't they told us? Where had the money gone? What were they using it for if not our education? I felt a deep, burning anger and betrayal. All this time, they'd let me believe I'd have to take out loans or drop out when they had money that could easily cover everything. It made no sense. Right there at my grandparents' house, I called my mother and put her on speakerphone. I wanted my grandparents to hear everything, no misunderstandings. I asked her directly about the college fund my grandparents had supposedly given her for me. There was a pause on the other end, and I knew instantly she was caught off guard. Her hesitation only fueled my suspicion. She was scrambling. "Who put such wrong ideas in your head?" she asked. That's when I told her. My grandparents did. I came here to ask them for money. At that point, she ramped up. She got furious that I'd gone to see them without talking to her first. She tried to explain, saying the money wasn't specifically a college fund for me, but rather money intended for the entire family. But before she could continue, my grandfather, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. He firmly pointed out that when he had given them the money, he had been very clear it was specifically for mine and Vivi's college education, not some general family fund. He asked her, sternly, where were you planning on using the money if not on her college expenses for the remaining 2 years? My mother fell silent, as if she didn't know how to respond. Then she mumbled that she'd need to talk to my dad, as he handled their finances. The way she sounded, so flustered and evasive, only made me more suspicious. It was as though she'd been caught in a lie, or at the very least, something they'd been desperately trying to hide. Later, she texted me, insisting I had no right to meet with my grandparents behind her back. She accused me of being a jerk for allowing her parents to overhear our conversation, for even trying to find out what happened to my college fund. As many of you suggested, my grandparents and I did decide to confront my parents directly. When we arrived at their place, my grandfather didn't waste a second. He immediately demanded answers about the college fund, without mincing words. He wanted to know why they were suddenly refusing to pay for my college when the money had been a gift from him and my grandmother. My father tried to waffle, mumbling something about the money just not being enough. But my grandfather came prepared. Without hesitation, he pulled out a stack of financial statements, showing exactly how much money he had saved for my education and given to my parents. Let me tell you, it was a lot. More than enough for all 4 years of college, and then some. I couldn't hold back my frustration anymore. I confronted them. Why did you never mention this fund to me? How could you let me struggle, let me stress, knowing you had this money? That's when my mom finally broke down. With clear guilt in her voice, she confessed. Over the years, they had slowly started dipping into my college fund. First, a significant portion went towards taking care of Vivi. All those times Vivi failed high school, and my parents paid for private school fees again and again, or hired expensive tutors. They'd been using my college fund. I had always assumed they were using their own savings, making sacrifices. But no, it was my future they were draining to prop her up. My mom also confessed that they had used the money for themselves too, to fund several vacations she and Dad had taken over the years. My parents admitted Vivi's new phone, her new car, yes, the one she was driving around, had all been bought with my college fund. As a result of all this, plus the fees they had paid for my first 2 years of college, my college fund, the one my grandparents had so carefully saved, was now completely exhausted. Vivi's college fund, however, remained completely untouched. I pointed out, it only seems fair then, that you pay my remaining semesters using her fund, since you used my money on her too. At this, my dad chimed in, trying to dissuade me. He called me his more mature kid, the unproblematic child who always managed to figure things out on her own. He urged me not to touch Vivi's college fund, saying that if I did, it would get exhausted too, and then she might struggle. Vivi has always needed more help than you, he said. As her big sister, you shouldn't be asking for her money. It was as if he expected me to understand, to agree with their reasoning. The implication was clear. My sacrifices were somehow justified because, in their eyes, I was strong enough to handle the consequences of their actions, while Vivi, who had always been more dependent, couldn't. Hearing their words was like another punch to the gut. My grandparents were absolutely furious. My grandmother outright stated she would fully support me if I wanted to sue my parents for misusing the college fund. There was no sympathy in her voice, as she pointed out that what my parents had done wasn't just morally wrong, but legally questionable too. My parents, now panicking, tried to argue, to justify their behavior. They fumbled for excuses, saying they'd done what they thought was best for the family. But by now, their words held no weight. My grandfather had heard enough. He cut them off. He reminded them, in no uncertain terms, that 2 years ago he had generously gifted them the family house they now lived in. He had done this so they could raise a family without the burden of buying a home. It was a gesture of love and support. He had never once asked for rent, never threatened to take the house away. But now, seeing how selfishly they had taken the money meant for my education, using it not only on themselves but also on Vivi's high school fees, tutors, her car, her phones, it was too much to bear. He could no longer trust them. My grandfather declared they needed to be taught a lesson. He told them he would meet with a lawyer and transfer the deed of the house to my name. Without hesitation, he added that if I wanted to, I could then just kick them out entirely. Alternatively, if they wished to continue living there, they would have to start paying me rent. And with that rent, I could cover the college expenses they had forced me to shoulder on my own. My parents were speechless. I could barely contain the satisfaction bubbling inside me. For the first time in this entire ordeal, my parents, who had secretly spent years making selfish decisions and prioritizing themselves and Vivi at my expense, were finally going to get a taste of their own medicine. Ever since then, they've been pleading with my grandfather to forgive them. My dad has even offered to use his own savings and sell Vivi's car to cover my college expenses. But my grandfather remains firm in his decision. Sorry for no updates for the last 2 weeks, but for everyone wondering where my sister was during that intense confrontation between my grandparents and parents, I didn't mention this in my previous update, but my darling sister was off celebrating with her friends at a lake house. Apparently, she was footing the bill for this getaway, which was a gift from my parents for having finally managed to pass high school. When I confronted my parents about it, their response was almost laughable. They told me how Vivi needed to relax after all the stress of high school. Can you imagine the audacity? Here I was, practically begging and fighting tooth and nail just to get them to cover my college expenses, the ones that should have already been covered by my college fund, while they had no issue at all sending their youngest off on a luxurious celebration. The double standards are infuriating to say the least. I come bearing happy news. True to his word, my grandfather followed through, and the house deed has officially been transferred to me. I am now the rightful owner of our family home. The sense of empowerment I feel is unlike anything I've experienced before. For so long, I felt powerless in the face of my parents' decisions, but now, the control is firmly in my own hands. Naturally, my parents are furious with me. They had expected to remain in the house without consequences, but those days are over. Despite their anger, I stood my ground and made it clear that they have two options. Either they vacate the house within a month, or they can stay, but prepare to pay me rent starting next month. There was no room for negotiation. It's almost ironic, after everything they've put me through, and now they are the ones facing a tough choice. Of course, my sister Vivi has found out about everything by now. Since a lot of you keep asking in the comments, I want to be clear. She wasn't ever involved in what our parents did, or even had any idea about our college funds. Despite the fact that so much of the money had been spent on her education and luxuries, she wasn't the one making the decisions. In fact, she's been incredibly supportive of me throughout this ordeal. When she learned about the full extent of our parents' actions, she was just as furious as I was. She's angry at them for how they mishandled the college fund and betrayed not just me, but the trust our grandparents had placed in them. So here we are. It's been a wild ride, and honestly, still feels a bit surreal. What would you have done in my shoes? Have any of you ever faced a betrayal like this from your own family? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what you all think.